Good evening, folks. Welcome. This is Luke Grand from Practical Farmers of Iowa. Glad to have you join us for another Farminar tonight, part of our Winter 2013 Farminar series. I wanted to start by introducing this series and kind of framing it for discussion, and then kind of laying out the process and the past of what we've done on these before to kind of help start the evening. And just wanted to start by saying the past. We are a 27-year-old nonprofit organization founded in part by this gentleman here in the photo, Larry Callum, with farmers Dick and Sharon Thompson and many others who wanted to get together to help farmers learn from each other. And so they formed a nonprofit organization to do just that. And we've been very focused on helping farmers learn from each other ever since. And we're very glad to welcome you to this online learning. We've done about 59 online seminars. We call them Farminars because they're about farm topics. And we're very glad to have you join us tonight. Hundreds more folks watch these recordings online and in audio podcast form each week. So we're welcome the folks that are participating live in the room. Please put your name and email and where you're from in the chat box at the left. And be sure to click the viewer count to help us know how many folks are participating in these seminars, so we can report that to funders, which are listed on the other screen that I'll mention briefly. The Beginning Farmer Rancher Development Program of the Farm Bill has been very influential in helping us put these on, as well as many other partners, which I will list at the end of the evening. So we've had one, our first one was last week of the Winter Farminar series, and here we are still in the beginning with many more great sessions left, including a special Thursday noon Farminar coming up January 24th. So it's a great opportunity to learn all through the winter months and as you prepare for your new year of farming. We have so many great members, including Tom and Irene Franzen, in our membership, folks who really care about helping other folks and sharing what they know and helping to make better decisions on their farms so they can capture more data and make make some changes and make some profitable choices for their business and improve their farms and lives. And we have a really open and diverse community of folks, across the spectrum. We've got every kind of enterprise imaginable in our organization, as well as a great representation across the state, not just in one location or another. So it's a really wonderful place to farm in Iowa, and it's a really great community of people to learn from in Practical Farmers of Iowa, and we encourage you to be a member. For just $20 a year, students can join. An individual, just $40, and the whole farm, like this family shown here, can join for $50 a year. And they get some very dramatic discounts to our events, being a member of Practical Farmers of Iowa. So we encourage you to join online, practicalfarmers.org/join, and you can help to shape the future of our organization and change the programming that we do for farmers. So do consider joining as a member of Practical Farmers of Iowa, and keep up with us on our Facebook page, which we update regularly with new events. About 90 events a year we put on. We have a couple of annual conference highlights. Last week we had our largest annual conference ever with 630 registrants, including a 300-person potluck party on Friday night. So it was a lot of fun. We had really inspiring keynote address by Elaine Ingham on the right there. Elaine is the queen of compost, talking about adding soil biology to your farmland with some great compost tea applications and some really dramatic results that she's documented. We also noted a special gift from the Franzen family, which was very impressive. We wanted to recognize them and thank them for their support of Practical Farmers of Iowa and the future of farming in this state and around the country. One thing to pass on before we begin tonight is a great opportunity for getting paid on-the-job training from PFI member farmers. The Labor for Learning program is brand new. It was started just this year, and we're launching 10 PFI trainer opportunities around the state. So you could, if you're looking to get more experience on farms, you could work at one of these 10 farms, get paid at least minimum wage, and get a bunch of extra perks like paid time off to attend a Practical Farmers of Iowa event, and discounts for annual conference, and even a member homestay, which would help to reduce the cost of lodging to attend the PFI 2014 annual conference in Ames, Iowa. So if you're interested in this program, we're going to be updating the website this week and next with new information and new opportunities. So if you've got a friend in your life looking for some more work experience, we'll send them to Iowa, of course, to learn from farmers in the Labor for Learning program, PFI trainer farmers that want to help the next generation get a good start. All right, that's enough for me. Let's see if Laura Krouse has come back in the room. There you are, Laura. Okay. Add her to make her a presenter. All right, so maybe Eric, are you ready to begin? We'll start with this is how the process will work tonight. We have 3 speakers, and they'll each have 20 minutes to share their remarks, and then we'll have 30 minutes of questions and discussion. So Eric, if you want to turn on your microphone, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Laura, and then Maury. 20 minutes.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, well, my name is Eric Franzenburg. I'm a farmer over in Benton County in east central Iowa, and been farming since 1993. And we primarily grow our corn and soybeans on a more conventional system. We look at we grow a wide variety of crops: corn, soybeans, herbs, fruits and vegetables, and flowers. We started farming in 1993. The corn and soybean production is mainly conventional and GMO crops, and hopefully we'll be able to see some similarities between all the different types of corn and soybean systems, whether they're organic or conventional or GMO or even open-pollinated corn. Hopefully there's going to be a lot of similarities in the way that we choose the different crops. For us, we have approximately corn and soybeans. We have about 80% of our crop acres are in that. We have about 15% of the crop acres in herbs, and then another 5% in fruits and vegetables. So we're fairly diversified that way. I should back up. I could explain a little bit. In the top right picture is a picture of ginger that we grow in the greenhouses. On the left-hand side is some lilies in the greenhouse that we've been growing. And the middle picture is a field of milk thistle seed that we grow, and that's part of our herb production. And then at the bottom we've been growing some fruits in the greenhouses as well, which are strawberries. As I mentioned earlier, we do primarily conventional production systems. We are conservation tillage, and then our soils are tame and muscatine, which are about a 0 to 5% slope. And so it's a silty clay loam soil, some of the more productive soils that you'd find in Iowa. And that's primarily what we're made up of. We use a wide range of products. We do use some GMOs, we use conventional, and then we use conventional varieties as well. Just to give you an idea of our philosophy, or my philosophy on how I pick my corn and soybean varieties each year, the big thing for me is diversification. And to be quite honest with you, that is the key for me, is to be looking at diversification in all aspects of what I choose for corn and soybeans. I can't overstate that enough as far as what I do and how I go about making selections, because I'm not really interested in making a home run every year. I'm just interested in staying in the ball game, and I want to be able to be able to produce a good crop every year and not get lucky one year and then have a relatively poor crop the following year based on my crop selections. One area in which we diversify in is looking at the different maturity ranges. And since we're in east central Iowa, we look at 3 different ranges for corn. I tend to look for 100 to 105 day corn, which I will try to pick at about 25%, 105 to 110, which is about 50% of my crop, and then 110 to 115, which is about 25%. I tend to have the majority of the corn in the middle range because that's kind of what's most adapted to our area. So if you're in northern Iowa, you're going to be looking at corn growing degrees units that are going to probably be on the low end. You're probably looking at maybe a 97 107 or 98 up to 103, and then maybe 103 to 107, and then maybe 107 to 112, somewhere in that range for the north, and then maybe adjust accordingly to the south. We also spread our maturity out for soybeans. I tend to work from a 2.1 to a 3.1 maturity, and then I show you there that we have about, those are typically the ranges that I'm looking for maturity, a 2.3 all the way up to a 3.1, and I just tend to stay at about a 25% for each of those. And the reason why I guess I choose this system is because, every year you come out of the year in the fall after most of the corn and soybeans are harvested, and you tend to hear some ideas from farmers and also from dealers on, certain years you may find that the late season corn does better than the early season corn, and in some years it's complete opposite. And same thing for soybeans. You'll tend to see that there can be a range from year to year, and it's not always the same. It can be different from year to year. So this is a way to kind of spread your risk and try to get varieties that's going to cover the entire gambit so that you can at least be in good shape for a lot of your crop. I also try to diversify in the companies that I work with. For corn, I tend to use 3 different companies, and that, I think, is a way for me to diversify my risk. I know that, in a lot of these corn varieties, we're looking at similar varieties from one company to the other, but it's hard for me to determine those in particular. I'm not enough of a geneticist, and maybe Maury will be able to tell us a little bit more on that respect, but I just try to do my best to get different varieties coming from different companies. So I work with 3 different companies usually for corn, and then I'll try to at least do 2 companies for soybeans. I also try to diversify where I collect my information as far as learning about the different characteristics of the corn variety and also the yield information. I was one of the host farms for the Iowa FIRST trials for the last 15 years. FIRST stands for the Farmers Independent Research of Seed Technology. And so it is a completely independent company that makes requests of companies that want to come in and have their varieties of corn or corn hybrids or soybean varieties tested and compared to other companies' corn hybrids and varieties. And they'll do these tests in regions of the state. For Iowa, they do Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, and then parts of Nebraska, South Dakota, and North Dakota. So it's a way for a person to go, and you can actually go onto their website right now and look at all of their data and make comparisons there of what you see. Primarily what you're going to see is yield data, but they also look at you're also obviously looking at maturity, but also lodging and the protein and the oil contents of the different crops, different varieties. So it's a good way to try to get a non-biased report on several varieties. The downside with it is that not all the companies participate in this program. So you're not necessarily going to see a company that you may have a salesperson in your local area that is representing a company that may not have varieties in the FIRST trials. So that kind of limits your ability to take a look at their varieties on a non-biased basis. Iowa State University, through the Iowa Crop Improvement Association, also does basically the same type of thing. The companies enroll the varieties this time of year to be tested for this coming season, and you get similar results from them as well. Then also you have the ability to look at company results, and that's the one aspect that I think you need to consider as well. I know a lot of people think that maybe looking at company results you're not going to get maybe a completely fair representation, but I think that there's definitely a lot of merit in listening to what your seed salesperson has to say and try to understand what they're trying to show you and see whether it actually fits into what you're trying to do as well. it's great to be able to find, now like with multiple sites and multiple years, we can find multiple site information with the first and ISU trials in the independent area, and then the companies also have that ability. It's getting harder and harder, though, to find multiple year information. You can go to the first website and find other years' data, but a lot of the corn hybrids are hard to find multiple year information on, and so it does take some time to figure that all out. I also work with seed dealers that I feel that I can trust. It's just one of those things that you have to develop a relationship with the dealer and just see if you're on the same page as they are when it comes to picking out hybrids. And once I work with a dealer or a salesperson for a while and realize that they're working in my favor and trying to help me in doing the best I can on my farm, then I tend to work with the dealer and listen a lot more to what the dealer recommends as well. And another good source of information would be also from other farmers. And sometimes that's hard information to give, but if you have a couple friends in the neighborhood, or if you know someone that you can trust and you drive by their field and you really like the way their corn looks or the way their soybeans look in the fall, I think a lot of guys are willing to, tell you what they know or what they've been doing or what worked for them in the past year. So I wouldn't, sometimes farmers can be protective of that information, but I think in most cases guys will tell you what they know and try to help you as much as they can. Another characteristic that I really watch for is the fertility aspect of the soil. If you're looking at soil conditions which maybe your fertility is not in the best of shape, then you're going to be interested in choosing different varieties. And here's kind of a thing that a lot of companies will compare to is looking at Racehorse varieties versus Workhorse varieties. And when I refer to a Racehorse variety, I'm considering one that is probably high yielding, has good vigor, and will really get a good start to the year, and is primarily looked at as something that really yields well. And when you see the soil types, the two soil blocks there that I've got pictured on the slide, I probably wouldn't put a Racehorse variety on that left-hand side soil, which is really low on organic matter and more of a clay soil, because there's going to be probably a lot more variability in the productivity of that soil. And that's a place where a Racehorse variety probably just is not going to do very well. Now, the Workhorse variety is one that, you look at, if you look on that soil, it would obviously work in both soils, but I think it would be more suited to the soil on the left where there's little organic matter and more clay content and just more variability. You're going to get more consistent results with a Workhorse variety than you will with a Racehorse variety. You may not get the same yield results, but you're definitely going to have much more possibility of getting, well, I should say that you will get just as good a yields probably with a Workhorse variety on soils that are low in organic matter and maybe on poor drained soils or very light soils. Other factors that I will look at when picking out corn and soybean varieties is standability. This one's really important to me, and when I talk to seed company people, this is the one thing, and when I look at the individual results of varieties, I really look for this particular characteristic. We have seen problems with wind lodging, corn lodging over the past 15 years, and so I really look at this pretty strongly. Other things to consider is if you're an early planting, if you like to plant early, you're going to want to be looking for a corn variety or soybean variety that has good early season vigor. Same with high residue soils. I think you want to really have a consideration of having a good high vigor plant early in the season. If you're a person that harvests corn late, likes to let the corn dry in a field, which is what I'm in, that's what we tend to do year after year. You're going to want to look for corn varieties that have good ear retention, and then also good stock quality, which kind of comes back to your standability issue. And then the same thing you're thinking about for corn on corn. Look for disease packages that corns that are good defensive corns, have really good disease tolerance. And then of course yield. And then, as I just mentioned, diseases are another consideration that you should be thinking about at least. In corn, there's a lot of different diseases. I'm not really going to go into any specifics about it, but there's just a lot of things to consider for corn diseases, especially if you're looking at a corn-on-corn situation. You tend to have a few more, or a little more concentrated disease problems on corn-on-corn. So it's definitely something to consider. In soybeans, we're definitely some issues to consider when you're picking varieties, especially when you look at one field to another field. The three diseases you see there, sudden death syndrome, white mold, and soybean cyst nematode, all three of these can be a big part of a field. And if you know that you have those in your field, you want to steer away from varieties that have very low tolerance to those. And most companies have that information available, and they should be able to steer you in the right direction. The picture that you see there is a soybean plot, and it actually has, you can see the dead beans that are kind of here and there throughout the plot, and that's those are plants that are indicative of white mold. In summary, I guess I would just say that I try to collect as much information as possible on the varieties and hybrids, and try to get as much background as I can from the company, and then also from independent companies that are doing testing as well. And then I always consider what kind of cultural practices I'm going to be doing that year. Whether I'm planting early or late, my rotation, and also the residue that we have in the field, and then also looking at the soil characteristics such as the slope and the fertility and the drainage. All of these can play a part in what varieties that you're going to be choosing. I guess in my view of this entire thing, I guess I feel that there's really no perfect corn hybrid or soybean variety. There's just a lot of trade-offs, and you need to be aware of what you want to prioritize in your fields, and then take that to your seed salesman and tell them what you're looking for, and then see if they can help you find the varieties that will fit. Or if you're seeing varieties in some of these independent trials that you think are worth pursuing, check with the company representative and just visit with them a little more about those varieties to find out in greater detail based on what you're seeing in your fields. And so I just wanted to emphasize again that we diversify as much as possible when it comes to picking them. For my plans for this year, I'm really looking at how the season is going to shape up, and with the possibility of being drier than what we have been in the past. Hopefully not as dry as last year, but we could very well be on a dry spring. I really have gone to a completely defensive look at my corn varieties and soybeans, and so everything that I've purchased to this point has been extremely defensive, and I'm not even really looking that hard at yield results. I just want to make sure that we have plants that are good, healthy, good root systems, and good stalk systems. So that's kind of what I'm looking at for this year, and that can vary from year to year, but based on our weather situation and how things look right now, that's kind of where we're looking at for right now. So I think with that, I'm basically finished with what I need to discuss at this point. So I'll turn it back to you, Luke.
Are there any questions that you want to ask right away before we move on to the next system? Feel free to put a question in the chat box, folks, if you have something specifically for Eric that you can't hold on to until 8 o'clock. But I'll pull up Laura's slideshow in the process. Brian might have a question, and if that's him typing one in now. Laura, do you want to begin? We'll grab Brian's question later on. Eric,
okay, I can.
Sorry, Eric, you can.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you can mute your microphone, Eric. Laura, you sound great. Great volume.
Okay. So my name's Laura Krouse, and I live near Mount Vernon, and I grow open-pollinated corn. That primarily I grow it to sell it as seed. That's the use for the crop on my farm. And the website for the farm is called abbyhills.com if you want to learn more about it than what I'm going to say tonight. So this is a picture of the farm, 72 acres. A lot of it is visible from the road, so every dumb thing I've ever done, everybody can drive by and see it. There's a great big pond in the middle, and you'll notice that the fields are laid out on the contour. And if you see those squares and rectangles sort of at the top of the hill there on the left, those are gardens. Okay, so I purchased the farm in 1988, and of the 72 acres, 54 are tillable. My primary business is a CSA that has about 150 shares, about 200 families involved. And the rotation for the farm is corn, oats, so corn in year 1, oats with a seeding in year 2. Then in year 3, it's either a hayfield or a pasture. And year 4, it could continue to be a hayfield or it could go back to garden. But definitely by year 5, it goes back to garden. So that I'm always putting garden in alfalfa, basically in a plowed hayfield. So that makes it possible for me to have a little bit better control over the weeds in the garden. And when that works itself all out, I usually end up with 6 to 8 acres of open-pollinated corn somewhere on the farm. I try to put it as close to the middle as I possibly can so that I get away from my neighbors. But it's not a very big place, so the middle isn't, even getting to the middle isn't really far away from the neighbors. So this is a picture of a really tall guy standing in some really tall corn. That's probably about 8 feet tall there. It's not always that tall, but when it's happy, it is. I usually plant it at about 30,000 seeds per acre, and that's considerably higher than you would normally expect open-pollinated corn to be planted. I push it because I want to make it yield even at high population. So I'm trying to get the population, the tolerance for high-density populations up. So I planted about 30,000. I usually tell my farmers, my customers, to not go higher than 22 to 24,000. I always wait until the soil temperature is plenty warm, usually May 10th or 15th. I tine weed it 2 or 3 times. Just in the last couple of years, I've got a tine weeder. I cultivate a couple times. We combine after the neighbor finishes soybeans. So I don't have a combine, but I've got a neighbor who has a nice one, and he does it for me, and we figured out that if he does it after soybeans, then if there's anything to clean out of the seed, it'll be soybeans and not somebody else's corn. I mean, we clean the combine as good as we can, but there's nice things still in there. Hopefully there's soybeans. And then we have a bin where we dry the corn with just ambient air. So we try to get it as dry as possible in the field, and we hope for a dry time after we harvest for at least a few days. This is a tine weeder, in case you've never seen one. This is from Kovar in Minnesota. And I like it quite a lot. I've had it a couple seasons. I'm still trying to learn to use it well. The seed that I grow is called Abbey Hills open-pollinated. When I bought the farm in 1988, I bought it from the family that had the farm, the Neal family, and they used to call it Neal's Yellow Dent. Their great-grandpa brought it to the farm in 1903 from what the family myth is that from some champion ear of corn, and it's selected from a Reed's type. Reed's was a real important yellow dent corn right after the Civil War, and a lot of the yellow dent corn that's used in the Midwest is a product of Reed's one way or the other. So this is also. And it's suitable for silage. That's probably its primary usefulness, but also people graze it. Some people harvest it for grain, and some people harvest it for human food. And my family eats it. It's quite good. Here's an article from 1970 showing Gordon Neal. So he's the son, I think he's the son of the guy who brought it to the farm back in 1903. And he had pretty good luck during the Southern Corn Leaf Blight of 1970. So he had a booming business right after that because the corn, since it had so much diversity in it, stood quite well compared to the hybrids that all had the
Sorry, folks. Looks like we lost Laura there. We'll get her back on as soon as she can log back in. That's fascinating. Eric, have you ever seen a photo like that?
No, I haven't. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? It's really incredible looking ears.
Eric, do you have any familiarity with open-pollinated, the process, maybe to help folks who are, I know you had an agronomy degree. I don't know if they ever taught you open-pollinated, though.
Yeah. No, I really haven't. I've been to Laura's farm and have seen her corn, and it looks really good. But I don't have a lot of background on it, other than just basically, open-pollinated corn is open-pollinated corn in the truest sense, I believe. It's just completely pollinated with there's no crossbreeding or anything like that. It's just it's completely crossed within itself. And I don't know, hopefully Laura will say a little bit about how she selects ears for the next year. I'd be interested in seeing how she does that.
Absolutely. I remember the story of H.A. Wallace in that great biography that was written about H.A. Wallace maybe about 10, 15 years ago now. But H.A. Wallace famously said, "What's looks to a hog?" And really revolutionized. But previously, we had selected corn by open-pollinated varieties by how it looked. And his Pioneer Seed Company revolutionized the hybrid process, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, it's amazing how it's evolved over those so many years now. Yeah.
Well, I wonder if we should switch to Maury's presentation this time, and then we'll catch back up at this slide when Laura can get back on. What do you say about that, Maury?
That's fine with me.
Alrighty, let me pull up your slideshow. And you may begin.
Okay, well, this is Maury Johnson, and I'm with Blue River Hybrids Organic Seed located just south of Ames. And I'll start by saying that I really appreciated the comments that Eric made earlier, and you'll notice that I'm going to say some of the same things that he said, maybe in just a little bit different way. But I think he had a lot of good things to say, so thankful for that. I kind of made a little bit of an outline here, and these were some of the things that I guess we kind of look at or consider when we're selecting hybrids, and I think these are the same things that you know, as a grower that you probably want to look at too. The first thing, and I'll get into this a little bit more later, is that essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to estimate future performance of a hybrid or a variety by looking back at what it's done in the past. And that's always a little bit tricky. And I think there's as much art to that as maybe there is science. Because at the end of the day, you can't necessarily know what the future is going to be like and how a given hybrid or variety will respond. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about something that I call yield stability or reliability. Then the third thing is the likelihood of consistently getting a hybrid, whether it's for organic or for conventional. Then the seed purity and why that's important. Then the research and product development that some companies do more of than others. The local service or dealer. And Eric made some really good points about developing a relationship with a dealer near you that you can work with and can trust. And then finally, what does your grain buyer want? And the grain buyer can be somebody off the farm, but it can be yourself. What kind of grain are you needing, whether it's soybeans or corn? So we'll kind of take a look at these items here. As I said, essentially what you're trying to do is you're looking at past performance of a hybrid or a variety, and you're trying to select seed for next year, knowing that next year is going to be different than last year. You know, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of concern right now about you know, soil conditions and drought conditions, and it's something that I'm concerned about in our seed production. But the other day I happened to think, well, how surprised would we be if 2013 happened to be a normal year for moisture? You know, we've kind of made all these plans for it to maybe be dry, and what if it turns out to be normal? And so I know there's a lot of trends right now which would indicate it's going to be a dry year, but it could go the other way too. And so we don't want to make the mistake of selecting the seed for next year that we know we should have planted last year. As Eric mentioned, you know, there's data from seed suppliers, and some of that, you know, the quality varies, I suppose. I don't really look at too much of what other companies put out there. I know in our case, the data that's on our website, there's really not much doctoring of it. It is what it is, and I suspect that there's quite a few other companies that treat their data the same way. Your seed supplier, especially on conventional, may have some recommendations, and that can be pretty important if it's somebody that you trust. The independent data was mentioned earlier, the state trials, the first trials, and Blue River is a relatively small company, and we are in some of the state trials. We're not really in any of the first trials because those, for the most part, all involve corn with traits, and so we don't normally compete against those kind of hybrids, so we don't participate in the first trials normally. But all of those trials do cost money, and some states it's more than others, but you run a pretty hefty amount of money for putting your hybrids in state trials, and so we would do more. We'd like to do more than what we're presently doing, but we're like any other company. There's a budget to kind of maintain too. But if you can do any kind of testing on your farm or maybe in connection with another neighbor, that can give you some pretty good information as well. One suggestion that we make, and Eric, I think, suggested kind of the same thing, and that is to consider a 20-60-20 rule. This isn't my idea. It's I've seen it in 2 or 3 other places. But essentially the suggestion is that if 102-day maturity would be your ideal maturity, then plant most of your corn in that maturity, but also plant some that's earlier. And in the diagram here, I've got some that's 5 days earlier, and then plant some that's later, 4 days later. So in this example that I've got on the slide here, we've got corn ranging from 97-day to 106-day. And that just kind of spreads out your risk, especially in 2012. I think we would have found that maybe some of that earlier corn might have done a little bit better than some of the later corn because of the moisture situation. And Eric mentioned doing the same kind of thing on soybeans, and I would agree that's probably a good idea to spread out your soybean maturities. One thing for that organic farmers will need to consider is the requirement to plant organic seed. And there is still a fair amount of conventional and treated seed that is used by organic farmers. And a lot of times that's up to the certifiers to whether or not the certifier will allow that. And so if you're an organic farmer and you're thinking about using conventional seed for one reason or another, just make sure that you've checked with your certifier. Especially at this time of the year, and as we get further towards or closer to springtime, there will be certain types of seed or certain maturities that organic suppliers don't have, whether it's Blue River or Albert Lee Seed House or whoever. We may have had it at one time and run out. Just check with your certifier as to what your certifier will allow. One thing that I think is important to look at, and it's kind of hard to sometimes determine, but that's something that I call yield stability. It would be great each year if conditions were ideal, but over a 10-year period of time, we may have a year or two where conditions are really good, and then we've probably got 5, 6, 7 years where they're just sort of average, and then we've got 2, 3 years where they're not good at all. And so what we're really looking for, I think, is not necessarily the hybrids that'll hit the home run, but the hybrids that year in and year out will be consistent performers. And that's just one of the kind of the things that you want to look at as you're looking at data, whether it's from a company or Iowa State. If you take a look at the state trials and you see a hybrid that's planted at 3 or 4 locations around Iowa, if it's in the top 1/4 at all those locations, that's an indication of stability or reliability. And as Eric was saying, it would be really nice if we could look at a hybrid in multiple locations for multiple years, and if we saw the same hybrid doing well across all those environments, then we'd feel pretty good about the reliability. Now internally, we look for that kind of data and we try to develop it. But for you as a farmer or a customer, it may be harder to see if you're looking for a particular company's hybrid and trying to determine the stability of the hybrid. One thing that is always an issue, and that is what I call the purity, the varietal and physical purity. For corn, it's pretty easy to determine whether or not you've got varietal purity just by looking out at the field after, at pollination time. Is it the same height? Is it pollinating at the same time? So that can be determined. But on some of the other crops, like even soybeans, sometimes there can be accidental mixtures take place that that will impact the ability of the seed to perform. But you want to look for seed that, especially like with the alfalfa seed and grass seed, where there's not weeds or other crops, things of that sort. The reliable supplier, finding a reliable supplier, it's been a little more difficult the last couple of years because of drought conditions that have impacted seed production. And so a lot of companies have not necessarily had what they would have preferred to have had. And the other thing that, as I'm mentioning here, is the average lifespan of a hybrid today is a lot shorter than it used to be. A number of years ago, you could find a hybrid in a company would keep it for 3, 4, 5 years. Today, it's maybe just 2 or 3 years, and so it makes it harder to once you found a good hybrid, one that works well for you and you like, the next year maybe the company doesn't have it. But some companies do keep hybrids in their lineup longer, so you might kind of be aware of which companies tend to do that. The other thing that I think is important to think about is the seed supplier investing some of their money for some of their income, some of their sales income for future developments, future improvements. the hybrids that we have, or the seed that we have today, is the result of what somebody invested in, maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And so I think it's important that whoever you're working with, you have a feeling that they're interested not only in giving you a good product today, but they're interested in having a good product for you 5 years from now or 10 years from now. And that's just something that in time you can maybe get a sense of as you work with a particular supplier. The local service, and again, this was something that Eric mentioned, but the local provider, whether it's a farmer, dealer, or somebody at the local co-op, they can provide a pretty good service to you. Whether that means you need an extra bag or two at the end to finish out a field, or maybe you've got a replant situation that needs to be looked at, or maybe you ordered, for some reason, you ordered 10 extra bags of corn. Well, you have somebody locally that you can work with to help return that seed so that you can get your money back. But the local dealer, one would hope, there's a lot of good local dealers out there, and I guess I'd say if you're not happy with who you're working with right now, do some scouting around. I think there are some good people still involved at the local level. And the last thing I was just going to mention here was knowing what your grain buyer wants, in terms of maybe GMO standards. This year aflatoxin is an issue in some places. Maybe there's certain requirements for foreign material, and so it's important to know what your buyer is wanting ahead of time, so that you're not surprised at the time when you're trying to deliver it. And I think that's the end of my my presentation here, Luke.
Thank you, Maury. Any questions specifically for Maury right now while we bring up Laura's slides again? All right, Laura, you got about 12 minutes left.
Okay.
20 minutes allotment, so you've still got time to...
All right, let's get to this weedy corn at the edge of this field. So this is not a very good advertisement for a tine weeder, but what I want you to see here is the irregularity of the field. So the plants are all sizes and shapes and heights, and actually pollination takes about 3 weeks spread out. So there's a lot of variability within that field, a lot. When I'm selecting for improvement for Abbey Hills, I look for, first of all, I do it in the field in the fall, and the first thing I look for is a good ear present despite being crowded. So I want plants that can make an ear even when they're within 6 inches of their neighbors. So we're trying to get the ability to tolerate high density population to go up. Then I look for plants that are standing straight and well rooted, healthy stems and shanks, healthy ear tip, not too tall, not too short, not too much insect damage, a good-looking ear with dented kernels and twin rows, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute, and a deep yellow color. And so we have a small selection plot in the middle of the cornfield where we hand harvest 200 or 300 ears that meet these criteria, and then the neighbor comes in and combines the little selection plot and also the field. And so when I talk about that twinning, Abbey Hills has a real distinctive pairing of the kernels, much deeper than you see in most varieties. So hopefully we end up with a whole bunch of ears, 200 ears that look like this. And then we take them to the lab. So we take those 200 to 300 ears and we shell them and package them individually. And then I take them to Iowa State and I run them through the NIR machine, which gives me data for protein, oil, starch, and density. And with that data, I choose about 80 ears that have the highest oil and highest density. And what I'm really interested in is protein, but sometimes just having high protein is not necessarily an indicator of good feed quality, because there are proteins that aren't so digestible. There are proteins that can be present in too high a relative concentration and make other proteins less useful. So high protein is probably good, but not always good. So the thinking here is that we choose the ears with the highest oil, meaning that they have nice healthy germ, a nice healthy baby plant in there, and that's going to be high in oil, and that's also probably going to indicate high protein. So here's my dad. We take one ear at a time, run them through the sheller, package them independently. Then I take them to Ames and I run them through this machine. This is the NIR, and it non-destructively analyzes each ear alone. I can just do one ear at a time. And this is the data. And if you look at, let's see, oil is the third row down, and density is the last column on the right. So if you look at, go up, Luke, a little more, up, 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 right there. No, down. One square down, there you go. Okay, so the oil by density relationship right there, you can see it's slightly positive. So we can sort of say that as oil goes up, density goes up. And if you look up one, move, yeah, that square right there, you can see that as density goes up, protein tends to go up too. It's a little bit more positive relationship. So I kind of look for the 80 ears that would be in the upper right-hand corner of that graph. And they all have a number. Each dot represents an ear, and each ear has a number and a name. So I can find its envelope, and I take those 80 envelopes, put them together, and that's how I make the seed for my small plot, my small selection plot in the middle of the cornfield. So I bulk that, and I make one little plot. It's usually about 20 rows by about 400 feet. And that small plot then is surrounded by the rest of the cornfield. And that small plot becomes the source of the 200 hand-selected ears for the following year. The rest of the seed from this last year's small plot is used to plant next year's seed field. And then the seed harvested from the field is the one that I sell to my farmer customers. So this is what the corn looks like that is going to go into the field next year. This is not the plot, the 80 very special ears, but rather this is just some pretty nice looking ones that we took out of the plot that we think are going to do well for next year's field. And you can see they're quite variable. That's kind of the thing about open-pollinated. It looks like everything. One question that I've had the experience with now that I didn't expect when I started messing around with this corn is denty versus flinty. Flint corn, the corn that I've used to improve my corn has been a flint. And flints tend to have higher protein, which would be good, be more dense, which would be good, somewhat lower oil, usually much lower starch, and relatively lower digestibility because they are so hard. Dent corns, the typical corn that we grow in the Midwest, tends to have lower protein and be less dense, but it has a little bit higher oil often, and it often has much higher starch and is much, much easier to digest. So if my customers are going to use my corn to feed dairy cows, they want good digestibility, but they also want high protein. So I've had to sort of figure out how to balance this denty flinty question to get something that my customers will like. And I also think that my customers tend to want the look of a dent corn because it's much more common. It's what we're experienced with. So these are more denty ears of Abbey Hills. And you can see how they have that double row, that paired row look with that deep indentation. And there's dents on the top of each kernel. This is subtle, I know, but this is 3 more flinty ears. And you can see that they look a little bit more pearly, and they have a really small dent in them. Those are probably going to be a little bit higher in protein. They're probably going to be a little bit more dense, and they're probably going to be a little bit less digestible. I sure like the way they look, and so it's my tendency to kind of pick the flinties. I sort of have to force myself to pick the more dent-looking corn because I think my customers would like it better. So to improve stem strength and protein, I did a hybridization in 2006 with some landrace selections from Uruguay and Argentina. And Linda Pollock at ARS at Iowa State helped me with that. It made Abbey Hills, within 2 years, I could tell it was much more flinty, and it also stood much better, better standability. Now that's been several years. This year we planned another hybridization, and we're going to use a line called BS31. And this is, my helper this year is Paul Scott from ARS. And with BS31 we hope to introduce good standability and good protein, 110-day maturity, which will be a little bit longer than Abbey Hills is right now. It tends to be tall, it's yellow, and it's slightly dented, so I think it's going to help with the look also. Now, that's my experience with being a corn breeder. I certainly never thought that I was going to start a career as a corn breeder, but after 25 years, it's kind of fun. And what I've learned is that farmers can be crop breeders. We don't have to have geneticists and professional crop breeders do it for us. They can help us, but we can also do quite a bit of work on our own. And open-pollinated varieties of lots of different crops can be improved if somebody works with them. And I'd say of all the crops that have the most difficult time improving, corn is probably the one that's the hardest to improve, but certainly the vegetable varieties, many open-pollinated varieties, can be improved if somebody works with them. The beauty of this is that farmers can own the genetics that they develop instead of buying them from a company. And we can also get locally adapted, either open-pollinated or hybrid varieties selected under organic or low-input conditions to meet the unique needs of these kind of farmers, or to meet the unique needs of markets that we might sell into. So I'm pretty excited lately about thinking about farmers and as crop breeders. And one of the reasons I'm so excited is I went to the Organic Seed Alliance meetings last winter, and I met people who are working on open-pollinated vegetable varieties. And one of them was a guy named Frank Morton, who owns a company called Wild Garden Seed. And he's a lettuce breeder. And some of the best lettuces that we grow for the CSA were developed by Frank. And I got to sit down and have lunch with him. And I really found it really exciting to think that we can do this. And he says in his website something that I think is pretty smart. Seed saving and adaptive selection have been part of the farmer's rights and responsibilities since the emergence of agriculture. As practitioners of this old art, organic farmers can reclaim the power to forage crops that better fit their land, their systems, and their imaginations. I think that's a pretty good sentiment. I think he's right. And then here's another example from an article called Plant Breeding from a Farmer Perspective, and it's an article available on the Iowa State Agronomy website. And this farmer is also another farmer from Oregon who says, breeding should be decentralized, diverse, regional or local, and under the control of or available to as many individuals as possible. Indeed, recognition needs to be paid to the historic fact that the greatest accomplishments in domestication occurred under the constant care and nurture of individual producers, gardeners, farmers, and herding people in every community on the planet. And he says, we can do well to show respect to the legacy of those who got us most of the way to where we are now by reinvigorating a localized, decentralized public matrix of trained professional breeders working for the public good. And I find that very inspiring, and it makes it fun to work on open-pollinated corn. Here are a couple of websites that I find pretty useful. Organic Seed Alliance is a national organization. The Northern Plains Sustainable Ag Group works on all kinds of grains, improving all kinds of grains. Organic Seed Alliance probably has a little bit more experience with vegetables. So that's all I have to say. If anybody has any questions.
Amazing. Let's take some questions from the audience, perhaps. What do you guys think about all these different choices and concerns? And it seems like a lot of work to me to pick the right hybrids and varieties, but very important work to do. Eric or Maury or Laura?
Yeah, this is Eric. I guess I would say that it's probably one of the more important decisions that you're going to make in the calendar year is trying to pick the varieties and hybrids that are going to work the best on your farm. It's one of those decisions that becomes pretty important.
Eric, you do things kind of different on your farm. Some people would say that in your neighborhood, I'm sure. Why have you chosen not to do different like non-GMO or organic or open-pollinated?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Soybeans on your farm.
Luke, we primarily the main reason is that I haven't been able to find a way to commit my time to it. We actually grow all of our herbs are grown organically and they're certified organic, and then we grow our fruits and vegetables in the same manner. But only a few of those are certified. So for me, it's a time management problem. For me, is I know that growing corn and soybeans organically takes a higher management level, and I haven't found a way that I can split my time and get everything done as effectively as I can.
Well, good for you for knowing when to not add another thing.
Yeah, it's especially hard for me.
Sometimes to say no.
But that's one place I have been able to say no.
Maury, what do you think about some of the questions coming in here?
Well, to tell you the truth, I haven't been. I have to take a little time to read the questions. I missed them, so I'll take a look at them over here.
So I do have a question for Laura, if that'd be okay.
It looks like she just got booted again, unfortunately. I'll see if she's hanging out in the participant. Looks like she's trying to get back in, but I'll type it in.
I was just wondering,
down.
When she plants her corn selections that she's going to make for next year, and she puts them in the middle of her plot, in the middle of her cornfield, is that for preventing outside contamination, or what's her reasoning for putting her seed selection plot in the middle of her field?
I got it. So when she joins us back in, I'll make sure she can
Thanks.
answer that.
This is Maury Johnson. There was a question from Blue Pike Farm regarding corn and going into broilers, and I think it's a good question. I just don't know enough about poultry nutrition to answer it, though. But I think there probably is some difference in terms of maybe some hybrids would be better or some grains would be better, but I just don't know enough about the nutrition of chickens to tell you.
Yeah, Blue Pike Farm, we're going to have a Farminar with Cindy McCullough and a beginning farmer, Drew Leitz. She works with all kinds of specialty feeds and develops rations. So do keep that question and bring it into the next, I think it should be in February, that Farminar. I can look up the exact date for you and let you know in the chat box. February 12th, Tuesday night, February 12th, Cindy McCullough and Drew Leitz, PFI Farminar, 7 p.m. Tuesday night. That should be a good time to bring that question.
I guess I also wanted to mention that Maury made a good comment about seed dealers and what their role is as far as representing their company. I think for the most part, you can trust your seed dealer. Sometimes we think that maybe they're just representing their own interests, but really I think the good ones that have been around a long time, they've been there a long time for a good reason, and so they're really there to help farmers get the most out of their selections. And so I think it's one of those things that you may be reluctant at first, but if you can find someone that's represents their company well and you can tell that they're looking out for what you're trying to do, then I think you'll be in pretty good shape.
And this is one of those situations that has really changed a lot in the last 10 years. It used to be most seed dealers were farmers themselves, and they planted the seed on their farm, and they had practical experience with that. And there still are farmer seed dealers like that, but as there's more and more situations where the local dealer is maybe it's actually somebody who works for the local co-op, or they may be pretty knowledgeable about the agronomy, but they may not necessarily have direct experience of their own. And again, some of those folks can be pretty helpful, and you just kind of have to sort through who's helpful and who isn't, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good point, Maury. That's well said.
Hey, Maury, I wondered, there's a lot of beginning farmers in our network that'll be watching this recording online, listening to it. Do you want to provide kind of some background information about non-GMO, organic, baseline genetics, that then how that fits into GMO varieties and hybrids?
That's a pretty broad question, but I'll see what I can do. Right now, of the corn that's being sold on a national basis, probably 90% of it is corn with traits, GMOs, whatever you want to call it. The organic part of this is a really small fraction, probably less than 1% of the actual total. The non-GMO, in other words, the seed corn that does not have any traits, it's not being offered or promoted a lot by the larger companies, but the regional companies, a lot of those are having some success with their non-GMO corn hybrids. And if you look at some of the state trials, you will see where some of the non-GMO hybrids have been entered, and some of those do really quite well against some of the hybrids that have all the traits and technology and all that. So the non-GMO market, it's a small market, it's a niche market, but it's I think it's growing. At least that's kind of what I'm being told. One comment I was going to make on the open-pollinated, see some use of open-pollinated seed corn in the United States. My impression is that you see a lot more use of it in Canada. At least we tend to run into it a lot more in Canada than we do here in the U.S.
Why do you feel that that's the case?
I'm not really sure. I don't know. But it seems like among we have sales in Canada, and it seems like we are competing against open-pollinated corn a lot more in Canada than we see here in the U.S. But I couldn't really give you a good reason, though.
Interesting. Other questions from the audience about your outlook for corn hybrid selection and soybean varieties for this year? And
I was just going to mention what kind of resound what Maury said about the conventional hybrids. I was looking at the ISU results here today just in preparation for this, and I did notice in the East Central Iowa plots for ISU that just looking at yield, but four of the top 5 varieties for yield in the early season test were non-GMO varieties. So I was quite impressed with that. I thought that was really good to see.
Well, and I think some of it, and I don't follow the trait business, very close because I'm not involved with it at all. But I think there is concern among people, when they see Roundup-resistant weeds in their field, or some of these traits may not be working quite as good as they used to, and yet the price of the seed is pretty expensive, and I think there's a few people wondering, well, what am I really getting when I pay these prices? And maybe I'm just as well off to get the conventional seed. And it's kind of remarkable. Our organic seed is 10 years ago. It was noticeably more expensive than any other seed corn out there, and that's not the case at all anymore. There's quite a bit of the traded corn that's more expensive than organic seed.
So when you see something like that, Eric, and you see the prices demanded for those traded varieties and hybrids, at what threshold do you start thinking, hey, let's try some of this on a small plot and see if it works, if we can work it into our system?
Yeah, we do plant, probably 20% non-GMO seed right now, and yeah, I definitely look at my alternatives for how I protect my crop in comparison to the GMOs, how the GMOs does protect the crop, and I just look at the ways that a different management system to do the same thing that the GMO crop does without the traits, just doing it in another fashion. And so when I take into account all those costs, and I find that the elevated price of the GMO just isn't, in my opinion, what it's priced at, then I definitely go with the non-GMO.
Luke? I would answer the question about why I put the
go ahead.
selection plot in the middle of the field. Yes, it is to prevent outside pollen from coming in. Gives me a little bit more protection, so at least the ears that I get out of the middle plot are probably mostly Abbey Hills. But you can't keep pollen out. I know that pollen from the neighbors has been coming into that farm since 1903. And some of it's probably good. Some of it not so much. Some of my customers can't, or have to know that it's non-GMO, and there's no way I can completely control for that. So, but we do the best we can with location and timing. I try to be later than all my neighbors.
Any other questions from folks in the audience? Maybe we'll have Eric and Laura and Maury. Do you want to do a quick, maybe take a minute and share your final thoughts about why what you're doing now and what you're doing for next year, and how things are. Kind of some comments, maybe you want to
share. Well, I'll go first since I'm here, and who knows how long I'll be here. Well, I'm going to plant my regular plot next year, and I'm not going to put anything out there that has less than 12% protein, and I think it's probably good quality protein, so I'm pretty excited about that. There's quite a bit of demand for open-pollinated corn for silage. Dairy farmers like it quite a lot. And so I'm actually going to try to grow a little bit more seed next year, this year in 2013. I think they like it because the cows like it. I think it's more palatable than the BT corn. And I'm going to start a little hybridization plot somewhere, probably off in the middle of one of the vegetable gardens, where we're going to cross it with this BS line and see if we can make something a little bit nicer for the future.
Excellent. Eric or Maury?
Well, I guess we're starting to look at seed production now for 2013. We actually grow seed for 6 crops. Corn is the biggest amount that we do, but and we do diversify our corn growing locations from Michigan to Indiana to Illinois, Wisconsin, and Nebraska. So we hope that 2013 is a good year for our seed growers, as well as for our customers too.
Yeah. In regards for me for next year, I tend to be, even though it seems like we do a lot of different crops, and probably people think that we're really out there on the edge all the time, I really am fairly conservative in how I approach things. And so I think I mentioned earlier that I'm kind of on considering how the weather has treated us to this point. We've kind of taken a defensive stance and just trying to make sure that we have instead of racehorse varieties, more of the workhorse varieties in our lineups, and kind of taking it from there. And I agree with Maury. He mentioned, well, who knows what the weather will be like next year. We could get all kinds of rain and have all kinds of moisture, and that's quite possible. And if we do, the workhorse varieties will do well there as well too. So you can't go too wrong with the workhorse varieties. Sometimes you just maybe give up a little bit on the what you could get with the racehorse varieties. And it's been interesting to listen to Laura and Maury about the organic crops and then the open pollinated, because we're starting to see with the GMO situation that these aren't the cure-alls for everything that's out there. We're starting to see the problems develop, like Maury had mentioned, and I don't know for sure, but I think there looks like there's more opportunities for the people like Laura and Maury and what they're doing, and I hope there will be more opportunities to expand their market base as time goes on, as more people realize that we just can't cure all these problems with just developing GMOs all the time.
Thanks, Eric.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like that was a great. Unless Zach Action has a question, I just wanted to thank our 3 speakers for preparing such great, slideshows and really spending some extra time to be thoughtful about what they wanted to say tonight. And really, I love that feeling of everybody wants everyone to do well and to try to put the best seed out there and for whatever farm system is the farmer's working with. So thank you all for being so supportive and sharing of each of your time and talents with others.
You're welcome.
Wanted to call attention. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I wanted to call attention to our funders who make it possible for us to pay our farmers for sharing their knowledge. I just wanted to slide down here real quick. As I mentioned, the Beginning Farm Rancher Development Program is part of the Farm Bill, and we definitely need that to be. We need to have a Farm Bill. So do tell your Congress people that you definitely need that Farm Bill to help do things like this programming to help improve your farms and lives. And also thanks to the USDA Risk Management Agency, Special Crops Block Program, the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, Cedar Tree Foundation, Ag Ventures Alliance, John Deere, and Cliff Bar. All really great funders that make it possible for us to do this every week in the wintertime and the off-season for farmers. And I hope you'll all join us again next week for another Farminar on 7 o'clock Tuesday night and a special Thursday Farminar next week. Don't forget, put on your calendars, noon, lunchtime Thursday Farminar, the 24th.